The ACC loses two more of its top players. Georgia Tech, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Pitt start to sort out the Coastal Division. Notre Dame keeping the ACC in the spotlight. Could Notre Dame also keep the ACC out of the college football playoff? And NC State, welcome to the 2015 college football season. All right, this is ACC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. I bring on the best bloggers in the conference to set us up for the weekend's play, and we have some good action coming up this weekend. But first, let's get to some news and notes. First, Virginia Tech starting quarterback Kendall Fuller, one of the best in the nation, first-team All-American preseason, out for the year due to a knee injury, did not play against East Carolina. He is out for the year, and now he will make a decision about the 2016 NFL Draft. Secondly, we have Mr. Shadrack Thornton, NC State running back, who led the team in rushing last year, has had his issues, and despite a two-game suspension leading into this season, led the team in rushing with 200 yards and a couple touchdowns. So Shadrack Thornton dismissed by the North Carolina State football team and head coach Dave Doran. And we will introduce our distinguished panel, and they will play two lies and a truth in letting us know why Shadrack Thornton was kicked off the NC State football team. So we've got Dan Rubin of BC Interruption, we've got Jeff Greenberg of Sports Glutton, and also Jim Hammond from Cardiac Hill. All right, gentlemen, first of all, Dan, why did Shadrack Thornton get kicked off the NC State football team?
Well, sources that are very good in the people that I've reached out to said that he was caught shooting at squirrels with a pellet gun on a bike path on campus. So they approached him, the police. They saw he had a long gun in his possession. Turns out it was just a pellet gun, but because he was firing and it was on campus, they brought him in. Coach Doran and had enough of it and tossed him. Those are pretty reliable sources that I've got, and I'm going to stick to it. I'm not going to give them away because that would be really bad on my part. So, tragedy that it had to come to that for him.
We are protective of our squirrel population, especially on beautiful college campuses in North Carolina. All right, Jeff, can you give us a reason why Shadrack Thornton was kicked off the NC State football team?
Yeah, unfortunately, for reasons unknown, it was said that he was riding his moped, which is his chosen mode of transportation, and hit a pedestrian, and rather than get off the moped, stop, make sure the person was okay, it was a hit and run. So he actually hit the person on the moped and fled the scene, and that led to an interaction with the Raleigh Police Department, which led to his dismissal from the team.
I have to think that one over. It's a possibility. All right, Jim, what do you have for us? Thornton getting kicked off the Wolfpack football team.
Actually, he was in a grocery store, and he was shoplifting crab legs. It just, I've heard of this before, but it just seems so unbelievable. I can't believe it would strike twice in the ACC.
We'll have to contemplate that one. That would never happen. Poor job by you, Jim, of possibly thinking up something that could never happen. So forget that one for sure. All right, Mr. Greenberg delivered the correct response. Shadrack Thornton, running back from North Carolina State, counted upon heavily in this offense, kicked off the football team on a moped, hit a pedestrian. That's about the extent of what we know for sure. There's a lot of alleged story behind that. Here's a kid who, in the past, has been suspended from the football team due to department rules violations leading into this season. The reports out there are that was drug-related. He previously had a marijuana possession charge. He also had misdemeanor assault on a woman. So, Jeff, do you have some background on what's happened here?
Well, there's not a lot of details coming out officially. His track record isn't good. This does seem to be you've kind of had enough strikes, and it's time to get you out. I mean, even this morning, as early as it happened on the ACC coaches teleconference today at noon, Coach Doran at the time had still not made a decision. He said he had heard about it last night, was gathering details, but rather quickly in the afternoon, he came to the conclusion to dismiss him from the team, which tells me maybe he had other information that the public doesn't, because on the surface, it didn't look that bad with what he was charged with. It might have just been a, you know what, this is your third, fourth, fifth strike that we know of publicly, and it's time to let you go. Coach Doran, to his credit, acted swiftly, acted decisively. It's still going to allow him to get his degree, which I think is a good thing. And I think, right now, Coach Doran doesn't want distractions. I think he had given him chances, and chances were gone. I think Coach Doran runs a tight ship.
This is our 7th ACC breakdown. This is Jeff's initial appearance, but he has joined me here on Mark Rogers TV for a number of ACC previews, including North Carolina. So, Jeff, we'll go to you first, since you have yet to chime in on the show, just in regards to your kind of widespread view of the ACC performance thus far this season and what stood out to you thus far in 2015.
I think the thing that have stuck out, Virginia Tech's defense, I thought was going to be a lot better than they have performed so far. I think that Louisville was going to be a lot better than they've shown so far. And I think that Clemson and Florida State are doing what they're supposed to do, which is win. I don't know if they've done it impressively yet, although Clemson really hasn't had to worry much. Even in that Louisville game this weekend will be the one that really shows what's going on. And then when you get back into the Coastal, I think it's the Coastal chaos that we all expected. I think you've got teams that are going to battle it out to the end, and last weekend showed some knowledge with Duke beating Georgia Tech. That was a big win for the Blue Devils coming off a loss to Northwestern. So they get a win on the board right away against one of the top Coastal teams. This weekend, two huge games in the Coastal, Pitt-Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech, North Carolina, that are going again to show which teams maybe get a jump start on this Coastal chaos. On the Atlantic side, I do think that team that could be the benefactor of other people crumbling could be NC State. They're going to fight or play a wounded Louisville team coming in at 1-3, but they get to play them at home. And then they turn around right away next Friday and go to Virginia Tech, which at the beginning of the season looked like a daunting win. But depending on what happens in the Pitt-Virginia Tech game this weekend, that Virginia Tech team next week could be pumped up for one last gasp, or they could be just wounded ducks. So I think right now the ACC is playing out overall how we expected. Chaos in the Coastal, kind of chalk in the Atlantic for now. But there's a lot of things that were surprising, one being that, again, Virginia Tech's defense I thought was going to be really strong this year. I thought Louisville would come out at least 2-2 from that early stretch. And then, I think that NC State's that team in the background that hasn't been tested yet, but they're dangerous.
Hey, Dan, as Jeff mentioned, last weekend the most significant game was clearly the Georgia Tech-Duke, because it's going to have the most effect on the ACC race. Surprisingly, the Dukies win it. Georgia Tech's lost 2 games already. In terms of coaching decisions in the offseason, maybe the one nail goes in the coffin for Mike London, as they not only lose to the Broncos of Boise State, they get humiliated on national television 56-14. You had Wake going down to Indiana. Your BC Eagles survived Northern Illinois. If you can give us a recap of what you saw at the quarterback position for your BC Eagles on Saturday.
Yeah, and before I do that, Jim, I want to thank you for going down the Jameis Winston avenue with me, because my fake fact actually happened to Jameis Winston. He was shooting squirrels with a pellet gun. So I appreciate you not letting me stand alone, and vice versa, on anything related to Jameis Winston. But yeah,
I thank Jim for that completely.
But when we talk about Boston College on Saturday, it was an interesting game, because not a whole lot was going to be known about Boston College coming out of the Florida State game. The lack of a quarterback, the lack of a true offense, really you weren't sure what you were going to expect. You knew that both quarterbacks were going to see time. You were facing a very good offensive team in Northern Illinois. The Huskies came in with Drew Hare. They had lit up the scoreboard a couple of times over their time, and they're a team that doesn't lose a lot. So when you're talking about, it was a non-power team, but it was still a very good non-power team at that, coming out of the MAC. It was a very good game for BC. I mean, they win 17-14. They allowed one defensive touchdown that was caused by a very poor decision by Troy Flutie. He threw an interception that went about 70 yards the wrong way. It set up a 1st and goal. They punched it in to tie the game at 7-7 at that point, did Northern Illinois. And the second score was just a special teams breakdown, which caused by a kickoff return. So you score to go up 17-7 at that point, and next thing you know, you're giving up an ensuing kickoff for a touchdown. It's 17-14, and all of a sudden it's a brand new game after people were already heading to the exits at that point. So it was not the defense's fault that the game was that close, and I think that's going to be a continuing trend. Now, getting back a little bit to what I said about the offense, you saw 2 quarterbacks out of Boston College and Troy Flutie, who threw a touchdown pass, and Jeff Smith, who attempted 2 passes and didn't complete any of them. Who played better? It's tough to say. Jeff Smith was clearly the better runner and managed to finish with a better quarterback rating on that ESPN QBR, even though Troy Flutie went 5 for 12 or 4 for 12 or whatever it was. So it's hard to say that he played better based on statistics, even though that's where it leans. I don't think anybody jumped out and grabbed the brass ring. But they're going to need to do it this week because we're down running backs up at BC. BC also finished the game with 1 healthy running back in Tyler Rouse. Miles Willis, fractured foot. He's out for the foreseeable future. So things are going from bad to worse on the offense, even though the defense has been elite. What's the bottom line in all of that? Even though I'm getting all helter-skelter and I'm all over the place, we still don't know what to expect out of Boston College.
Yes, as Dan alludes to, I have very loose editorial control over the show. Basically, it ends when I shut up. So it's out for these guys to do whatever they want with the show, especially when Dan's on. Got to keep my eye on Dan. He will say anything. But that's a good thing.
Hey,
usually a good thing.
You never know what's coming next, but I promise I'll keep it clean.
All right, Jim, this is how I hit you up for your entry into the show here, because I think you guys probably have picked up from me, I am huge on scheduling. And I hate the scheduling in the 14-team leagues, the SEC, the Big Ten, the ACC, because it is so skewed. So for your 2 apparent top teams coming into the season, Miami and Georgia Tech, talking about the Coastal Division, they have to play Florida State and Clemson, the supposed 2 best teams in the other conference, in the other division. Well, Georgia Tech, coming off the championship season, division championship, they lose to Duke. Now they've got the 2 toughies as well. Maybe this really opens it up for anybody to take this division. What do you think, Jim? Hey, Jim, you with us? All right, I'll throw it out there for Jeff. Jeff, we got Georgia Tech going down to Duke. Hopefully Jim will jump back on with us here in just a second. But just your thoughts on the division race at this point.
I think it's chaos. I think Duke got a head start by beating Georgia Tech. I think, like you said, that hurts Georgia Tech right off the get-go because they have to play Florida State and Clemson. I think that when you look at, again, this game this weekend with Georgia Tech and North Carolina, it's going to determine a lot. It's going to determine if Georgia Tech stays in the running. It's also going to determine whether North Carolina gets off to that same good start that Duke did. And then you've got the Pitt-Virginia Tech game that, getting into conference play now for both of those teams, the one that wins is 1-0 in the division and gets that leg ahead just like Duke did.
Right, Jim, let's get you in here. We got Pitt at Virginia Tech. We got North Carolina taking on North Carolina taking on Georgia Tech after the Yellow Jackets went down last week against Duke. So this seems to be wide open. I don't know if Jim can hear us. I believe his feet's a little bit locked up. Hey, Jim, are you with us?
I am.
Okay. Wide open division race in the Coastal.
Yes, it is wide open right now, and that's what we expected all along with this division. I was actually on a podcast with some Virginia Tech guys last night. They kind of got a kick out of me because I said anyone can beat anyone in this division except Virginia, and they all started rolling on the ground. They thought that was hilarious. But with this game this week, the Pitt-Virginia Tech game, I think a big factor in this game, it's going to be the weather. Obviously, it's going to play a factor on all the games on the East Coast this week. So it's really going to be a lot about running the ball. And
we'll audible here. We'll go to Dan. We'll wait for Jim. Dan, you got your BC team going to Duke. That's a huge game in the Coastal Division in particular. I don't want to count out your Eagles against Florida State and Clemson, but this really affects the Coastal Division race with Duke at home, a 7-point favorite against your BC Eagles.
Yeah, the Duke Blue Devils, it's going to be, I would take the under, first of all. Before I do anything in this, I'll take the under. And when we're talking about this Duke-BC game, you're looking at the over-unders pushing somewhere between 35 and 40. Duke's a 7-point favorite. But these are two teams that have very good defenses and don't move the ball particularly great. Sirk down there at Duke is a much better runner than he is a passer. I think he's an inexperienced passer, so he makes a lot of plays with his feet. Goes looking for the open receiver when he can, but he only threw for 150 yards against Georgia Tech, threw for 114 against Northwestern. He's not really going to be the type of guy who can beat you through the air. And with Boston College's problems at quarterback between Flutie and Smith, neither one being particularly strong, and play calling being a little bit of an issue too in terms of running routes and getting receivers open, which they claim to have the athletes, but they just can't seem to get them open over the first few weeks. Coupled with the injuries at running back, you're still very deep at running back, but you're going up against two very good defenses, coupled with the fact that it's going to be a washout. The weather forecast on Saturday is looking bleak. Jim kind of touched on it. It's looking really bad down there in Durham on a fresh turf field. I don't care how good the grass is. It's going to be nasty. It's going to be slippery, and there's going to be a lot of ground and pound between the two teams, and I would anticipate that game being one of those 9-6 or 10-7 type of games where somebody comes out and wins the game with a chip shot field goal with the wind at their back. I don't see it as being a particularly great game, but you're absolutely right. The end result is going to go a long way to determine stuff in the Coastal Division, much more so than the Atlantic Division. And God, when you have all these factors coming in, it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out for a team like Duke that seems to be getting some traction.
So that's usually ready-made for a BC team going on the road, a ground and pound in the slop, but you're missing your running backs.
Yeah, it's going to be very hairy. Without John Hillman, the ground and pound between the tackles is just not going to be there. The offensive line is very inexperienced and inconsistent. They're getting better, but they're still very inconsistent and have started to take steps forward, but along the way there's going to be steps back. Tyler Rouse had to have cleared a concussion protocol during the game because he got up off a kickoff coverage and he got absolutely trucked. Got up and wobbled off the field. I think he was knocked back somewhere in between the first and second grade. They probably asked him a few of the key important questions. He was allowed back on the field, which is great for him. I'm glad that he was healthy, that he was cleared. They have a medical concussion protocol that's not administered by coaches. It's administered by team physicians. So he was allowed back. He finishes the only healthy running back on the team. You have him. Miles Willis is still questionable. He opened up the year with mono, which, if you've had it, is not a fun thing to have. And it's probably fun getting it, but it wasn't fun having it. But then you have Marcus Outlaw, who is the other running back. He didn't finish the game against Northern Illinois, but he's going to be a factor as well. And then on the Duke side, you've got all those running backs with Shaq Powell and those guys. So it's going to be, for a Boston College team, ground and pound. They're going to need to come up with a few read options and try to negate what seems to be a Duke advantage in that particular category.
I, for one, many times want somebody to knock me back to the first grade. Life was good back in first and second grade. Nothing wrong with that. All right, Jim, let's get back to you on this Pitt situation. You got a new quarterback. It's not Chad Voitek. It's Nathan Peterman. He goes to Virginia Tech to take on what was expected, as Jeff talked about, to be a top defense in the country, but has lost a cornerback and isn't playing stellar football, giving up 35 points to East Carolina last week.
Yeah, Virginia Tech definitely has a very scary defensive line. But obviously, when you take out Kendall Fuller, that's kind of like that's their guy. He's their first-round pick. So obviously, with Pitt, you have an opportunity to exploit that with Tyler Boyd being one of the best players in the conference. But like I said, with this weather, it's how much of a factor can they get Boyd into the game. Looking back at the Pitt-Iowa game 2 weeks ago, Pitt's running game it just never seemed to get going in Iowa. It was a tough place to play, night game. They had a wonderful crowd, but so it's going to be key for Pitt to establish the run, but it's not going to be easy to do against Virginia Tech. And it's just tough to think about. With your best weapon, you don't know how much he's going to get the ball.
Since it's been a couple weeks now, Jim, I would like to know your reaction on that 57-yard field goal.
Only to Pitt, you know.
Yeah, that was rough. Boy, you go to Iowa. We knew that was going to be a close one, and yeah, 57 yards through the uprights, and Iowa wins, and they're 4-0 right now. All right, Jeff, this North Carolina football team has really played one serious opponent, and they really took out Illinois at home. I wasn't completely surprised by that because although both teams are coming off 6 and 7 seasons and bowl losses, the North Carolina roster much more talented than Illinois. Now you go to Georgia Tech. They're licking their wounds. Do we expect the Yellow Jackets to spiral out of control, or are they going to lick their wounds and come back fighting? We will see. So how good are the Tar Heels? How much of an effort do you expect in Atlanta?
I mean, I expect an outstanding game. I'm hoping that Atlanta gets a little less of the weather that is coming up the east, because it would be interesting to see how these teams do. Of course, you can look at it both ways. A wet game might hurt the UNC passing game, but we saw last week that a wet game actually hurt the Georgia Tech offense against Duke. They did not do well. And when you think about a triple option offense, they have to make a lot of quick cuts, a lot of things. They don't get running downhill right away. They're running to the boundaries and then making cuts where they see. So that it wasn't as easy for Georgia Tech either. So the weather is a toss-up. But with UNC right now, their strength is the offense. They have a lot of different weapons. I think they've got 14 different guys that have scored touchdowns in one way or the other this year. The passing game working well. The running game is getting better. Mainly all around because of the line. But the sneaky thing right now is the defense. This is again, a big test for the defense that Gene Chizik has right now, averaging just giving up under 15 points a game, which is a big improvement from 39 points a game last year. In fact, they've held the opponents to 17 points or less in every game. They didn't do that in one single game last year. So big test for the defense, because one thing that they have not done well, and I think they rank last in the conference right now, is run defense, and they're playing the triple option. So the triple option is a little different because you are going to gear up to stop the run and not worry about the pass as much. And so I think right now what you're seeing with Georgia Tech, they're not done by any means. I don't think Paul Johnson is a coach that crawls away and hides. But what we are seeing is that Georgia Tech was ranked high, but they had a lot to replace on the offense. And when you run such a high precision offense, which the triple option is, it's going to affect you when your specialists are all gone. So right now, last year it was a shootout, 48-43 in Chapel Hill. The weather may prevent a shootout, but I think it is going to be a game that kind of comes down to maybe who has the ball last.
All right, guys, I was looking through the schedule, and I know it's really insignificant. We shouldn't even waste our time with it, but we've got a little bit of time to fill here. So we might want to talk about Notre Dame at Clemson. We might want to touch upon that one. I don't know, Dan. What do you think? Notre Dame, Clemson.
I'm taking Clemson because I cannot, under any circumstances, pick Notre Dame and be able to.
You're a bad one to ask. Let's go to Jim on this one. We got Notre Dame, a team that Pitt's going to see a little bit later in the season, going to Clemson. Both teams, of course, undefeated, ranked in the top 12 in the country. The odds makers don't know what to make out of this game. It's basically pick 'em. The Tigers looked a little sluggish against Louisville, but that was on the road a couple weeks ago. They are loaded for the most part. Notre Dame beat up across the board. No quarterback, no running back in terms of their front line guys, but the C.J. Prosise filling in pretty well. I believe he's second in the nation in rushing, and they've played some pretty good defense. Had the one close call against Virginia, but otherwise Notre Dame's looked really good. Clemson hosting Notre Dame, huge game, not just for Clemson, but for the ACC.
I kind of like Clemson in this game. I like the 8 o'clock Death Valley atmosphere. And like you said, Notre Dame's just really banged up. Their toughest, they went to Virginia, but it's hardly it's not the same environment as Clemson at night on the road. And, they got to play their home games, and they kind of sleptwalk against UMass last week. UMass kind of went up, scored 3 early touchdowns on them, then Notre Dame told them to go away. But I kind of do like Clemson. I like Watson. I think he's going to have a big game. And I just think with that crowd, that environment, that atmosphere, I like the Tigers.
Are you guys up to make some predictions on these games this week? What do you think?
Yes, sir.
All right, look at this. Jeff, before we start, any thoughts on the Irish going to Clemson? This is a huge one.
Yeah, I think two things are going to affect this game. They're going to be possibly getting the thick of whatever Hurricane Joaquin is left at. It's supposed to be in that South Carolina area Saturday night. In terms how close the shore may affect it. But the key to that game, I think, is going to be the Notre Dame defense, particularly their front seven versus the Clemson offense. The Notre Dame defense is what beat Georgia Tech, and their injuries are on the offense, down on the defense. So that's going to be the key. I do think the home crowd, the home atmosphere, whether it's dry or whether it's rainy, hurricane weather, Clemson's going to pull that out.
All right, here we go with some predictions. We've got a Thursday night game, Dan. Let's look at Miami. They're undefeated, but they did lose two of their starting defensive backs in their last game, Deion Bush and Jamal Carter. Hurricanes, again, undefeated, so they're going to enter the ACC most likely undefeated. They're about a 7-point favorite at Cincinnati to take on the 2-2 Bearcats.
Hey, I know somewhere Cam's about to be very happy with me because that's all I'm going to say. I'm taking the U over the Bearcats. I think they're going to go up and handle it. Brad Kaya is just too good.
All right, we've broken it down. It's a big game at Blacksburg with the Hokies hosting Pitt.
I want to take Pitt in the worst way. I would love to see the Panthers pick up the victory there, but I think Virginia Tech's going to hold serve.
All right, we get an interesting game here in that Louisville really had a front-loaded schedule. They came out of the gate. They took on Auburn, who was supposed to be one of the 10 best teams in the country. That hasn't turned out, but it's still an SEC team that they had to deal with in Week 1. They lost to Houston. They had to face Clemson in Week 3. Louisville's down at 1-3, so the season could unravel pretty quickly on the Cardinals. They go to NC State. Interesting team here with Jacoby Brissett. We haven't found out anything about this team because they refuse to schedule anybody non-conference, and you guys know what I think about that. I start to get fired up when nobody schedules anyone outside of conference. Baylor, Mississippi State. Okay, NC State 4-0, hosting Louisville 1-3.
I'm going to take Louisville. I think NC State's a little bit of that paper 4-0, and if you look at their record last year, they really struggled in conference. I know that Louisville, 1-3, you tend to look at them and write them off, but I think they got a lot left in the tank, and I still think they're going to finish third in the division. So I'm going to take the Cardinals to go up to Raleigh and take care of business there. And you don't know when you lose a player during the week, it always seems to throw something for a loop in there. So I'm going to even if he is deserving of being tossed off the team, so I'm taking Louisville.
Boston College is already down a game in the ACC standings, having lost to Florida State at home. They're 3-1 overall, going to Duke, 3-1 undefeated in the conference, having won the opener.
I've always said that BC, in order to be bowl eligible, has to win 2 of 3 games. If they win the games that they should win, lose the games that they should lose. It's something that I've detailed at length, but I think the 3 games that determine if they go to a bowl are Duke, Virginia Tech, and NC State. I feel like they have to win 2 of those games. NC State is back-to-back with Virginia Tech on Halloween, NC State the week after. At home, Duke is on the road. I think they're too beaten up right now. I think they're going to make a game of it. I think the defense might be worthy of being ranked number 1 in the nation because the defense, I can be honest with you, is awesome. It is enjoyable to watch, but the offense, work in progress. I think this is one of those games where BC loses, and it actually helps them later in the season when they're a little healthier, a little bit more experienced. The offense will be better on later in the season, but I think this game, under these circumstances, I'm taking Duke.
Maybe Matt Ryan could stop by on Saturdays. He's playing pretty well right now.
Yeah, hey, I've said I got 4 years left of eligibility and nothing to it. Warm that sucker right up.
Yeah, that would be pretty, I'm sure. Florida State's a 19.5-point favorite at Wake. Of course, the Seminoles are much more talented, but you talk about offensive struggles. 1 touchdown offensively at Boston College, had their issues against South Florida, probably wouldn't have won the game if Dalvin Cook wasn't on their side. So we got Florida State going to Wake.
Oh, that was still for me.
Oh, yeah, we're still going through them here, Dan.
I got with us here. Whoops. Caught me napping on that one. I thought BC was going to end it. No, I got Florida State. I think Florida State's going to finish first or second in the Atlantic. They're not losing a Wake.
All right, big one here. North Carolina 3-1, Georgia Tech 2-2 in Atlanta.
Taking Georgia Tech. I think the conditions are right for them to turn it around.
All right, and then the one on the national scene that's going to gain a lot of attention, the Irish go to Clemson.
Well, I'm taking Clemson, but I think that's more of a legitimate thing. I just think Clemson's going to win the Atlantic Division. I think that if this is a game that the ACC needs, I think Clemson knows it. If they lose, they're more than likely out of the college football playoff with a league champion, whoever it is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take Clemson to win at home over the Irish.
All right, Jeff, we got you down for Clemson, right, against Notre Dame?
Yes.
Okay, we'll run down the rest of them. We got the Canes at Cincinnati on Thursday night.
I'm going for a little upset special with Cincinnati. I think Miami on the road. Cincinnati is one of those just terrible places to play on a Thursday night. Everybody that goes there struggles a little bit. I think NC State even went up there a few years back. But it's just one of those places that, I don't know. Miami can beat themselves in this game very easily, especially if they let it be a track meet right up front.
I cannot come up with the Miami or the Cincinnati backup quarterback. Gunnar Kiel got knocked out against Memphis when they scored like a zillion points and lost by 3. But the kid came in, I believe his name's Hayden, and threw for like 550 yards in that game.
Yeah,
so
I mean, he tossed the ball around. So yeah, that's my upset special.
All right, here's a big one in the Coastal. Pitt at Virginia Tech.
I think this is I think the spread's like 2.5, which tells me since it's on the road, it's a toss-up. If the quarterback I think a lot of what Jim said with the weather will matter. If they can get Boyd involved with a passing game, they can make that game very interesting. And they have running backs. They have running backs that have shown they can do something. So if they can be a true dual threat and catch Virginia Tech, kind of licking their wounds, I really think Pitt can go down there and beat Virginia Tech in Blacksburg.
A lot of big games here under the radar. Louisville at NC State.
That's going to be one of the more entertaining games to watch this weekend. I think that regardless of the weather, that will be a good one. I think Louisville's going to make a run for it. I think there's going to be a back and forth in that game. Just something tells me right now, a home game for NC State, I think they're going to pull it out. I think Brissett and Thornton's backup, who is really the main man now, Matt Days, can have a big day. But again, if Louisville's front line can give State trouble, maybe Louisville can pull it out. But I just can't see right now. I'm thinking NC State pulls it out at home. Okay,
Boston College goes to Duke.
If Boston College was healthy, this would be a better game. I think Dan's hit on a lot of the good points, particularly with the running backs and everybody else that is hurt. I think Duke's going to pull it out. I think they're going to play tough at home like they did last week. It may not be a pretty game, and it's not going to be a shootout, but Duke's going to pull that out.
Florida State goes to Wake.
Yeah, they might just be able to hand the ball off to Cook the whole day and win that game. So Florida State's going to take that one.
All right. Got your Tar Heels going to Georgia Tech.
Yes, this game, I mean, it's a big game. This early in the season, it's a huge game for both teams. Georgia Tech, this either gets them back on track or knocks them off for good. UNC is kind of under the radar right now after a season last year like they had within the conference as a whole. They beat Georgia Tech last year, which was one of their shining moments. They haven't won in Atlanta since 1997. I did like Larry Fedora's comment on Monday when he said, well, the good news is the 2015 team has never played in Atlanta, so they're not part of that streak. I think if UNC can keep the turnovers either to low or nothing, they can win this game. And right now I'm picking the Tar Heels to win in a close one again. Whoever's got the ball last, but I think the Tar Heels can pull this one out.
Which is a great reminder. Jeff gets an interview with Larry Fedora on a pretty regular basis, right, Jeff? So that's something to look out for on Sports Glutton.
Yeah, every Sunday evening, Coach Fedora and I do an exclusive interview. The whole point of it is to really, regardless of whether you're a UNC fan or any other team, it's more my interest in picking the brain of a head coach after he's gone through the film, after he's talked to his staff and evaluated that weekend, and just ask 5 questions of what he saw, what he's thinking, how he approaches different situations. And so every Monday morning it posts early at 8 a.m. It's called 5 with Fedora on sportsglutton.com.
That is good stuff. All right, Jim, here we go. We've got Miami going to Cincinnati on Thursday night.
I watched a little bit of that Cincinnati-Memphis game, and I just think Cincinnati's going to run into some problems. because Miami's defense is a little bit better. I like the Hurricanes.
Okay, we've got your beloved Pitt Panthers going to Virginia Tech.
I guess I have to keep my picks consistent because I was on the Virginia Tech blog last night. I picked Virginia Tech. It's just going to be tough for Pitt to go down into Blacksburg and win that game. I think it's going to be a 3-4 point game, but I like Virginia Tech.
NC State hasn't played anyone, but if they get a win against Louisville, they go to 5-0. So we got to start to take notice. Cardinals go to NC State.
I'm kind of under the belief that Louisville's a little bit better than their record indicates. I like Louisville in that one.
All right, we've got Duke with that Georgia Tech win under its belt. It could really make some hay in the ACC if they can survive BC at home.
It's definitely going to be an interesting game to watch, but it's just hard for me to pick against Cutcliffe right now. I like Duke.
All right, I guess this is give me, but I'll throw it out with Seminoles. The Seminoles going to Wake.
Well, I'm looking at the spread right now. It's 19.5. I still like Florida State, even on the road.
All right. Two pretty big ball games when we talk about North Carolina and Georgia Tech.
Yeah, it's obviously a huge game for the coastal repercussions. North Carolina, Georgia Tech. It's just a big game, and I kind of like Georgia Tech in this one. I picked them to win the division at the beginning of the season. So despite some of these losses they've come through the past 2 weeks, I still think they're that team. I still think they can turn it around and win maybe 8 or 9 games.
There are seriously like 20 games across the country that I could watch on Saturday, and sometimes people accuse me of watching 20 games. There's definitely like 10 I'd like to see, for sure, and this is one of them. Notre Dame at Clemson.
I'm sticking with my pick. I like Clemson at night in Death Valley.
All right, guys, it's always a good time. We got Dan Rubin from BC Interruption, Jeff Greenberg in the middle from Sports Glutton, and from SB Nation's Cardiac Hill talking Pitt football and ACC in general. We got Jim Hammett. Guys, ACC breakdown is always a good time. See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.